Okay, we are here to talk about modal verbs. By the end of this session, well, our goal, our outcome is that you'll be able to, one, appropriately label modal and semimodal verbs. Two, contrast the meaning of two different types of these modal or semimodal verbs in different contexts. All right. Here's one example of modal meaning. Sentence 1 states, it's raining. Well, this isn't a modal. There's no modal there. It's just a statement of fact. The speaker doesn't express any attitude, judgment, or interpretation. It's just a fact. It's raining. Here we use present continuous, is raining. It might be raining. Well, it's still present continuous, but the auxiliary verb is might, a modal verb. The speaker expresses here a judgment about whether it is raining or not. You can picture somebody like leaning out the window, holding out their hand, saying, it might be raining, or looking out the window a bit unsure. So it's more of a judgment or like a guess in a way. Well, here we see modal meaning two, and here we can broadly divide meanings into these two categories. One is modals for probability or certainty. That is, making judgments about what the world is like. It may be raining. It can't be Daddy at the door because he's got his key. He should be here around 11. What the world is like. Obligation or permission, that is, making judgments about what the world should be like. You shouldn't smoke. All workers have to wear a hard hat. May I have another biscuit? From the homework, we've learned that there are two different types of modal auxiliary verbs. There are pure and semimodals. I'd like you to pause me for a moment and put these into two categories. That is, come up with the 9 pure modal verbs and at least 3 of the semimodal verbs. All right. What we see is the pure modal verbs: can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, and must. And then the semimodals are examples like ought to, have to, be able to, be allowed to. What we know is that pure modal verbs all share the same characteristics when it comes to form. The semimodal verbs are closely related to pure modal verbs in meaning, but they don't necessarily share all the characteristics of form. What do we mean by this? Well, for example, pure modal verbs, here are the rules. Okay. One is that the negative is formed by adding nt. Another rule for pure modal verbs is that there's no s. We don't add s. There's no do or does. They are followed by the infinitive without to. That's the bare infinitive. They can be used with have plus a past participle to talk about the past. So if we match up the rules for pure modal verbs, that is can, could, will, would, may, might, shall, should, and must, we see that these are the rules, like E. I can't take my eyes off you. We mustn't say goodbye. There you make the negative by putting not or nt. 2, we don't add the s, like example D. We don't say every Jack shoulds have a Jill. It might as well be spring. No, then you sound like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings. We don't add s in the third person singular. Rule number 3 goes with example A. Shall we dance? What would I do without you? Here, we don't use do or does when we make questions. Okay. Number 4, all of the examples, pure modal verbs are used without to. We don't say, I must to go now, right? We use the bare infinitive. So, yeah, we can work it out. I must get to work. We don't use the to, we use the bare infinitive. And 5, they can be used with have plus a past participle to talk about the past. So we see that in example B. I could have danced all night. You must have been a beautiful baby. They must have left. We could have been there. Okay. That's the rule in form. How are these pure modal verbs literally constructed, right, in the code? Let's do a quick check. Read sentences 1 and 2 on the right. You needn't wear a helmet. You don't need to wear a helmet. A, in which sentence is need used more like a modal verb, like there's a meaning behind it? In 1 or 2? And in B, which rules, that is the form, can you use to justify your answer? Well, we see that sentence 1, it's really a modal verb. It's giving advice. You needn't wear a helmet. Need not. Whereas sentence 2 is just a statement of fact. There's no modal meaning. In fact, there is no modal verb there. You might also realize there's no modal verb in number 1 either, but it does have a modal meaning in that it's offering advice. And in sentence 2, there's no modal meaning at all. So in both sentences, 1 and 2, rules 1 and 4 apply. You add the NT negative, needn't, don't. And with number 4, all modal verbs are followed by the infinitive without to. Don't need, needn't wear, right? The bare infinitive. What about the use? Okay, so we've talked about how modal verbs are like constructed in English, but what about the use? Well, modal verbs have they have the same form, but lots of different uses. Could you pass me the salt? The modal verb is could. We're asking permission. It could rain this afternoon. Well, here it's could, but for probability or level of certainty. Mozart could play the piano when he was 4. Here, it's not actually even a modal. It's could, but it's a statement of fact about ability in the past, what Mozart could do. Another example, same form. Here the modal is, you found it, would. Different uses. I would often go camping when I was a kid. Here it's a statement of frequency of something you did a lot in the past. Frequent action, would go. She would say that, wouldn't she? Here it's basically probability or certainty. Yeah, basically what you're saying is she's like that, right? She would say that, wouldn't she? And the third one, would you like to come with? It's a polite request or an offer, but you notice that the tricky thing in English is that it's 3 different meanings with that same modal verb, would. Okay, so just to recap, appropriately label modal and semi-modal verbs. If we're talking about pure modals, we're talking about can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, and must. Semi-modal verbs are ought to, have to, be able to, be allowed to, and be able to contrast the meaning of 2 different ones in context. Like here we see it's the same modal, but the meaning is different. Okay. I thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.